A very good morning to you all. And thank you all. Thank you everyone for being here with us this morning. My name is Yemi Onogorua. I lead the public sector efforts here at Softcom, and I'm very, very excited and honored to have you all join us at this webinar. For those who may not be too familiar with us, just a little bit of background. Softcom Limited is a 13-year-old technology company on a mission to connect people and businesses with meaningful innovation. Equally as important is delivering transformational value whilst driving technology adoption by enabling visibility, accountability, cost savings, and effective decision-making. We like to see ourselves as a proud partner of potential. We work towards a society powered by inclusive human growth, one that gives collective access to every individual's success. As an organization, we're also heavily invested in enabling the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals, simply because it aligns with our own human-centric core. So for all inclusive human growth to occur and be truly achieved, enabling interventions and programs have to be put in place. The last 15 years or so has witnessed a vast technological revolution in Africa, with organizations ready to innovate and people enthusiastically embracing this innovation. We believe in an inclusive society and a connected Africa, which is why we do what we do. Whilst understanding that a life is only as important as the impact it has on other lives, at Softcom, we are witnessing happiness through the right application of technology to human problems. Before we get started, I want to acknowledge the presence of our distinguished keynote speaker, Her Excellency, Princess Adejoke Orelope Adefulire, Senior Special Advisor to the President on SDGs and former Deputy Governor of Lagos State. Princess Adejoke Orelope Adefulire served as a Deputy Governor of Lagos State from 2011 to 2015, and is an accomplished and astute politician with many years of experience in public service and advocacy. In her previous role as a Commissioner for Women Affairs and Poverty Alleviation in Lagos State, she displayed an innate passion for equality, fighting for women and children and the eradication of poverty. Thank you very much indeed, ma'am. Very happy to have you on board, very happy to have you participate, and for graciously agreeing to share your wealth of knowledge with us at this webinar. And I'm sure your presence will also enhance the experience of all the attendees. Thank you very much indeed, ma'am. I also want to take this opportunity to thank our panelists, of whom are here because of their expertise, their professionalism, and vast expertise in the subject matter. Dr. Judith of Unicef, very good morning to you. Dr. Bandara of UNDP, good morning to you, sir. Mr. Uba of the World Bank, good morning to you. And Mr. Shendemiolubai of Softcom, good morning. Thank you all very much indeed for taking time out of your busy schedules to participate on this webinar. In the next 2 hours or so, we'll be having dialogues that offer keen insights into the theme of sustainable development and its challenges in Nigeria, and also explore all the different solutions and initiatives that can enable the achievements of these goals by the year 2030. We urge you to prepare yourself to be challenged, excited, and inspired. Excellent. So without further ado, I would like to bring on the distinguished keynote speaker, Senior Special Advisor to the President on SDGs and former Deputy Governor of Lagos State. Thank you all very much and enjoy the webinar.
Good morning, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Distinguished participants, let me recognize the presence of my brother, the Solicitor General of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, my brother Mr. Yemekale, who has been very wonderful working with us as a state actor in the achievement of SDGs. They have been a very, very supportive, very active in this project of achieving SDG in Nigeria, because his role as sustainable is very key to the achievement of SDGs in many ways. And since I became the advisor to the president in 2016, it has been very wonderful. I thank you, my brother, for being a very reliable and active partner. So I thank the organizer and distinguished participants. Please permit me to stand on well-established protocol for this webinar program. And I want to congratulate the organizers of this webinar successful for bringing this meeting despite the challenges of COVID-19. The team, as I was told, achieving sustainable development goals in Nigeria, leveraging technology and achieving the SDG is not only suitable for timely as well. As we commence decade of action for SDG. Recall that in September 2015, the world leader met adopted the 2020 Agenda for Sustainable Development as a successor for development framework for Millennium Development Goals. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development envisions a present and a future that is economically suitable, socially inclusive, and environmentally resilient. This vision is expressed through the 17 standalone SDG goals with 169 targets and 230 mass indicators. But it is very simple. The SDG is a universal call to action and poverty, safeguard the planet, and ensure that all people enjoy peace, prosperity by the year 2030. The 2030 agenda possibility promise to leave no one behind means prosperity for all of us. So what does prosperity for all of us entails in Nigerian context? It is a Nigeria where a divide does not go to bed hungry and Taiwo has access to quality education. A place where Chioma feels confident to take long walk in the early evening, feeling safe, and where Ahmed does his business at any time of the day. In short, and there, where all citizens are empowered to achieve their full potential without any limits. Following the adoption of SDGs, Nigerian government acted quickly as overall implementation began as early as January 2016. The institutional framework has been established at national and sub-national level, and considerable progress has been recorded between 2016 to date. A number of strategic initiatives have been implemented, some still ongoing. Some of these strategic initiatives include development of the country's transition strategy from MDG to SDG. What are the lessons that we learned from MDG? Lack of full implementation. What are we going to move forward to make it? And that are some of the things that was conceptualized in the formation of sustainable development. So SDG data mapping and publication of Nigeria SDG indicator baseline report was done in 2017. Integration of economy, social and environmental dimension of SDG in the context of goal 1 to 6 social development, goals 7 to 12 talks about economic development, goal 13 to 17 talks about partnership, talks about peace, justice, strong institution, partnership for the goal, and general climate change implementation. So, SDG to the Nigeria Recovery and Growth Plan of Nigerian government, which from 2017 to 2020, also form part of the what government has done at the national level. Also, the domestication and customization of Nigerian integrated Sustainable Development Goals Policy Stimulation Model was launched. It's a 3-year document from from the national and sub-national government, with all the key states and non-state actors. Was launched by Mr. President at the General Assembly last year in New York. That's at the commencement of also the process for the evaluation of priority SDG, like SDG1, no poverty, SDG3, good health and well-being, SDG4, quality education in January 2019. We also commend the design and implementation of integrated national financing framework for the SDGs. It's ongoing and it was launched last month. Ongoing realignment of national statistical system with the requirement and indicator of SDG to be completed by August this year, by the grace of God, even though despite the COVID-19 pandemic, we plan to conclude a successful presentation of Nigeria 2017 and 2020 Voluntary National Review was rendered to the United Nations High-Level Political Forum this week, Monday. Second Voluntary National Review was presented on behalf of Mr. President to the United Nations High-Level Political Forum. So those are the community decade of action. Decade of action means 10 years to the achievement of SDG. In January 2020, the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic across the world is now challenging the prospect of achieving SDG all over the world, including Nigeria. Indeed, beyond the health hazard and human consequences of the pandemic, social economic uncertainty and disruption come as a substantial cost to the Nigeria economy, which is likely dependent on oil and gas. Indeed, COVID has really revealed the weaknesses of the healthcare system of our country. Unfortunately, those who have suffered the most in this trying time are poor and vulnerable women, children, people with disability, and older people. It said that critical times call for critical measures. This movement therefore requires that we all come together, recognize the impact of healthcare, education, social economy, well-being, and to find creative and innovation ways to build more equal, inclusive, and resilient society. Therefore, we must urgently build back if we are to be on track to achieving the confidence. Evidently, one of the most efficient ways to do this is by leveraging technology. Indeed, Nigeria 2021 International Review Report recommended that ensuring youth are well educated and to be able to transition to productive employment through the digital economy not only reduce poverty and help diversify the economy away from oil and gas. Needless to say that the application of information and communication technology is able to facilitate access to healthcare and education as well as agricultural value chain development. These are poor services beneficiaries. So those who disadvantaged and excluded, because the slogan of SDG is giving no one behind, so that we can mobilize everyone to prosper and to live a meaningful life. Integrating this digital solution to our existing system in a way that it will fast track our efforts and propels us to the finish line is the question that we must all ask ourselves: how do we leverage digital solution in learning, innovation, identity management, inclusion, data, and more achieving our SDG in Nigeria? Who has the capacity or resources to help? These are the questions we must ask and seek answer to. Unfortunately, it has taken, it had to take COVID-19 outbreak to force these necessary changes, and now we have the responsibility to act quickly, and we have to act strong and act precise to attain this transformational change that we have all seen legally achieve SDG. Obviously, we live in a world that is rapidly changing. Never experienced this level of quantum in technology The world is shifting to digital technology at a fast pace than we could ever have predicted. Nigeria can no longer afford to lag behind. We must leverage technology to achieve our goals. Experiencing shift in ideology as people now rely on technology for so many things, to work, to shop, connect with others. On the flip side, it draws attention to still enormous data divide. Millions are still legally excluded in Nigeria. Containing the pandemic called COVID-19 require a whole of society approach, government at all levels, the private sector, civil society organizations, citizens around the world, all of us come together to strengthen multilateralism and global partnership are more important than ever. Indeed, prior to COVID-19, we have gained significant traction around Goal 17, which is partnership for the goals, strengthening and enhancing global partnership for sustainable development. This entails the development of multi-stakeholder partnership that mobilize the share knowledge, expertise, technology, and financial resources to support the achievement and aspiration of SDGs. Nigeria has also adopted the World Bank Identification for Development cross-practice initiative with the vision of making everyone count by ensuring the unique legal identity and enabling digital ID-based services for all. Everybody must have national ID, and it will help us plan as we move forward. How many schools do we need more? How many hospitals do we need more? How many jobs are we creating? How we can improve the industrialization and encourage local and foreign investors into the country so that we can provide more jobs for prosperity for Nigeria. With this and similar initiatives, Nigeria is creating an enabling environment that fosters collaboration. And we now have capacity and capability to validate the identity of people we have reached and the one that we're aiming to reach, so that no one is left behind in the implementation of it in our country. We can go on and on as we so passionately about the thing we have achieved, but let us pause there. We hope that we have raised enough questions that triggers the different kinds of thinking for the future we all desire and we are passionate about to attain. Welcome to the new normal. Let me conclude by affirming Nigeria commitment to the achievement of 2030 agenda for sustainable development. I thank all the participants and the organizer of this program. Is very, very unique and timely, based on the situation we find ourselves as a country and as the world. I want to also say that all of this is also bordered on how we are going to move forward in making sure that education is digitally true. And the office is looking at it and working with the other stakeholders to see how we can get this to the poor and vulnerable population. We cannot open our schools now. And we are working together to ensure that children are back in school and prepare for eventuality going forward. I thank you so much for this. God bless you. God bless the Federal Republic of Nigeria.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency, Princess Adejoke, the Special Advisor to the President on SDGs and the former Deputy Governor of Lagos State, for this keynote address. Indeed, achieving sustainable development is a collaborative effort. Thank you for speaking to that. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the panel discussion on achieving sustainable development goals in Nigeria leveraging technology. My name is Karika, and I'm the moderator to drive this discussion with a panel of subject matter experts. On the panel today, we have Dr. Bandaras, Dr. Giwamo, Mr. Uba, Mr. Olobayo. In the next few minutes, I would introduce them and we'll go straight into the panel discussion. Dr. Bandaras is a senior economic advisor and head of strategic policy and inclusive growth unit at the United Nations Development Program, UNDP Nigeria. He's a champion of sustainable development goals and assists governments in development planning and policy making. He has served in Zimbabwe, Mauritius, Seychelles, and Tanzania between 2009 to 2019 as a senior economic advisor. Prior to joining UNDP, he worked for the United Nations, and Dr. Bandaras received his PhD in economics from Boston University in the United States of America. Welcome, Dr. Bandaras. Next, we have Dr. Giwamu. Dr. Giwamu is an educational officer at UNICEF and also the co-chair of Education in Emergency Working Group Committee. In the last 10 years, she has led the coordination of government and education key stakeholders towards taking critical humanitarian action for the restoration and delivery of relevant quality education to emergency affected children. This was done in order to support their right to education. She's also a doctor of medical microbiology and bacteriology. Welcome, Dr. Giwamu. Next, we have Mr. Thomas Uba. Mr. Thomas Uba is a social protection specialist at the World Bank. He has designed and implemented social protection delivery systems and has also provided support to the technical design of the new Nigerian national ID ecosystem. He has also worked to develop and implement the payment system platforms in Nigeria and Zambia under the World Bank. Welcome, Dr. Uba. Welcome, Mr. Uba. Next on the list, we have Mr. Omoshendemi Olobayo. Mr. Olobayo is the Chief Operating Officer at Softcom. He is currently responsible for providing operational oversight for the company and leads Softcom's value delivery in the market. Shendemi is passionate about impact and is committed to building a company focused on connecting people, businesses, and communities in Africa using technology. Under his leadership, Softcom has pioneered some of Nigeria and indeed Africa's largest technology-focused deployment aimed at solving societal problems in the areas of inclusion, knowledge, and growth by partnering with development enablers and private sector. Shendemi holds a bachelor's degree in information communication technology from Covenant University and is a graduate of Stanford University School of Business SEED program. Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone on the panel for honoring our invitation. I mean, I'm reading through the profiles and I have no doubt that this webinar would provide timely and expert information that will benefit everyone here. We'll cross-learn from one another, and I'm sure that the audience will benefit a lot from the insight that will be shared today. Without further ado, I'll go straight into the panel discussion. I'll start with Dr. Bandara. Dr. Bandara, the UNDP is in more than 170 countries and has been in existence since 1965. Given the current global crisis, how has the pandemic impacted the implementation of humanitarian programs currently running within your organization? Over to you, Dr. Bandaras.
Thank you very much. Good morning, colleagues. I recognize the presence of Princess Adejoke, with whom I work very closely. And thank you also for inviting me for this panel discussion. Well, the pandemic has also impacted our operations significantly in different ways, but at the same time, it has provided a lot of opportunities as well. In terms of humanitarian programs, I don't see a serious negative impact on the cash transfers, but I guess withdrawing cash could be difficult at times, depending on the situation in the electronic payment systems, especially when the systems don't work in this kind of situation. But what we have seen during the last 3-4 months is that while electronic transfers is working, directly reaching out to the communities through field presence has been impacted. It has been limited because of difficulties in travel, because of difficulties in reaching out directly to the people because of the disease. And also in some cases, say for example, we are heavily present in the north and east. There, the presence has been limited because of the increased violence as well. So in that sense, while the pandemic has delayed implementation of some activities, we have added different activities with the pandemic. You have seen the UNDP's presence in all aspects, providing support to the medical side as well as support to the humanitarian support. So in that sense, in order to make use of the maximum availability of resources and also the resources coming now, we have adapted repurposing of some of our activities, meaning some of the activities have been withheld while some other activities have been introduced, especially looking from a humanitarian angle to provide support to the most affected communities. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Bandaras, for speaking to that. And it's interesting, very powerful points you raised, repurposing of activities and basically just maximizing the available resources. It's a fantastic thing to do. Thank you for speaking to that. So I would go next to Dr. Giwamu. Dr. Giwamu, UNICEF drives change for children and young people every day across the globe in different ways, including education. In the face of the pandemic, what challenges have your organization faced in its efforts to enhance sustainable mechanisms for continued access and coordination of humanitarian efforts? So what challenges has your organization faced given the pandemic?
Rosemary.
Over to you, Dr. Judith.
I'm happy to be here. Good morning, everyone. I want to say that, UNICEF is in the business of ensuring that education remains the right of all children, more so in emergencies. And if you look at the SDG Goal 4, I want to take 5 key words. Inclusive. So it's talking about inclusivity. And when you talk of inclusivity, you have to ensure that education is made accessible to the special needs. It's not just ensuring that education reaches children that are not challenged, but even the disadvantaged children, in quote, they have the right to education. So in the work we do, especially with this COVID, we have to look for innovative ways to ensure that the children in the hard to reach terrains, there must be a way that we can get education across to them. Beyond education, for the urban children using the e-learning platforms, how can we come up with ways to get to the children in the disadvantaged areas? It has impacted equity. We are talking of equity and we're looking at gender. How well are we able to ensure that the girl child is able to access her right to education in a protective environment, safe from the impact of COVID-19 as it were? Because with COVID-19, there's more exposure to sexual gender-based violence. There's the need, when they're at home, sometimes the parents will use them to do some work. It's affecting the work. And then also we see that long-term closures have very serious impacts on education. It exposes children to some, drugs, cults, and things like that. And then we look at the health impact, because we look at education as a strategic tool that we use to address inequities. So let me give an example, like some school-based services like school feeding. School feeding, that with our poverty issue,
some children, the food they get is the food, is what they are served when they are in school. And so without them having that opportunity to have school feeding, sometimes they, you talk of sex for food. So some of the gains that we have made, in the last 1-2 years, and we have made some gains in increased education access, in enrollment, in quality, as ascertained by WAEC results. Some of these gains are being threatened. So the COVID-19 is threatening a lot of the gains that have been made in the last few years. And it's affecting our ability to actually support the children as duty bearers to, achieve their rights to education.
Thank you, Dr. Giwamu, for speaking to that. And I must say, well done with the work you've done so far. And education indeed is the passport for people to have a future. Just as a follow-up, because you mentioned some things, the pandemic has affected your efforts in a lot of ways, but I would also want to ask a follow-up question asking, what digital innovation have you found to be useful in this disaster response? Have you seen any innovation gaps, and how have you leveraged any digital tool to bridge that gap?
Yes, we have thought of different ways, working in line with our Federal Ministry of Education government partners. We have actually we have developed radio programs using and transcribed the NERDC. The NERDC is the government MDA that has the mandate for curriculum development. So we have transcribed that into radio curriculum, and we are now actually airing radio programs all over the country. We are also engaging with the school-based management committees, because we realize that they are the partners we have at the community level. And in engaging with them, we are ensuring that school packets, because we know that at least 3 million reach terrain where there are no mobile networks. So if you're thinking of radio education, you're thinking of TV education, Facebook and all that, what is the lot of those children? You have to make special efforts. So what we have decided is that, okay, we can do the modular approach, whereby we use our partnership system in place at the community level where most of the children are, to ensure that school packets are gotten to these children, and there's a way for them to do the work and then retrieve through these partners. So these are a few of the innovative approaches we have put in place.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for speaking to that. And from what you said, indeed, collaboration is the way to win in this pandemic. I like the fact that there are different levels of engagement across the educational hierarchy. So thank you for speaking to that. I'll go on to Mr. Uba right now. Mr. Uba, I have a question for you. One of the focus of the World Bank is to deliver value to people in need and promote social inclusion. In what ways has the pandemic affected your organization's efforts in promoting social inclusion and inclusive growth? Over to you, Mr. Uba.
Good morning, Karika. Good morning to the other panelists and to the keynote speaker, Senior Special Advisor to the President. I hope you can hear me well. First of all, thank you for putting this webinar together. I think it's quite timely and quite important to be discussing these topics at this time. And thank you for inviting me, to join. Regarding your question, you're quite right. The World Bank is indeed in the business of providing support through the government of host countries to various poor, vulnerable, and other thematic areas that we focus on. In terms of the impact of the pandemic, we heard the Senior Special Advisor when she was speaking in her keynote address, and she mentioned the term, the new normal. And that has taken on various shapes and forms. And I'd like to say that it's still, above all else, an unraveling situation. it's an evolving space, and also given that the impact is also evolving in that light. Specifically, what the World Bank has done is to, according to its twin goals of improving shared prosperity and eradicating extreme poverty, is to shift its specific purpose in terms of support to Nigeria particularly. So, focusing first, because when you look at the COVID-19 pandemic, there are two broad areas which the impact affects. So there's the health impact, and then there's the economic impact. So on the health impact, the government has, the World Bank has closely supported the government in through the NCDC and through its various projects, to rapidly provide a sustainable health system that can tackle the health cases of the pandemic. So providing funding so that innovations, and thank you to Dr. Judith from Unicef, who mentioned a couple of frugal innovations that would allow that will allow the work to keep moving forward. So health, the health support that the World Bank is providing. Then also in terms of the economic support, rolling out and expanding on the current cash transfers to the poor and vulnerable households is one of the support areas that the World Bank is providing to the federal government. So I think I'll stop there and hand it over to you for further conversation on this.
Thank you, Mr. Uba, for speaking to that. Indeed, we're in the new normal, and something that you said that was really key. Something that you said that was really key is how it's evolving. Nobody has quite experienced something like this before, so we all learn every day about this. So thank you for speaking to that. I have further questions, but I'll come back to you. Let me just head straight to Mr. Olobayo. Mr. Olobayo, I have a question for you. SOFCOM is focused on human-centered technology, and SOFCOM is focused on how human-centered technology can influence delivery and efficiency for programs. How has the pandemic impacted the implementation of your programs and operations? Also, how has SOFCOM leveraged technology in addressing these issues and delivering value to its partners and stakeholders? Over to you, Mr. Olobayo.
Okay, thanks a lot, Karika. I think the pandemic in itself is very clear that for almost every single industry, every single industry has been affected, either positively or adversely, as the case is. And I think for us in the technology space, it hasn't been, entirely different also. And I think for us, being an engineering firm, being a technology company, we have actually been, quite open in itself to the concept of remote working. So, even before now, our engineers, to a very large extent, have largely worked remotely. And a lot of the other teams have also worked remotely. So I would say the pandemic in itself, to a very large extent, really forced us to kind of reevaluate our approaches to service delivery and our approaches to, solution delivery in itself. And for us, I think the truth is we actually saw a drop in our cost of operations. And we also saw quite an interesting increase in our productivity. And I think that enabled us, build, closer teams, smaller teams, and a lot more focused teams as the case is. How have we been able to, evolve our service offerings, for our partners and the people who provide services for? So typically, SOFCOM as an organization, we focus on only 4 key areas. So we focus on identity, we focus on payment, we focus on learning, and we focus on data. And I think these 4 key areas, we like to refer to them as some of Nigeria and indeed some of Africa's biggest challenges. Our attempt to focus on these areas, the pandemic in itself has really now forced us to, really speed things up. So, I mean, what I mean by that is, you know, COVID in itself has, to a very large extent, prevented a lot of human interaction and enabled a lot of technology interaction, as the case is. And the systems that we're building, the services that we're providing are really enabling, I mean, our partners to drive some of these. I'll leave the question at this now, and I'm sure in the follow-up questions, I'll get into more specific details. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lobayo, for very interesting points. For me, I was interested in understanding how a technology company would leverage technology in the times that we're in. So thank you for speaking to that. You also raised an interesting point on lean organizations. It would be great to know, because how does this affect human capital development? Well, I would ask Dr. Bandaras and Mr. Uba. When I get to them, I'll ask them. But before we go on to ask follow-up questions, I want to invite the audience to participate in a poll. And why are we doing a poll? It's because your thoughts matter, right? Achieving sustainable development requires collaborative effort. So we want everyone, we want your opinions, your thoughts, because we're shaping the new normal together. So right on your screen, you'll see a question. Pick your preferred option. And we have 30 seconds to do that. The question says, what sector do you currently work in? And this is also interesting because we might work in different sectors, but one thing that is common to everyone is we're all experiencing a global pandemic all at the same time, right? So that leads me to the next question. Can I have the second question of the poll? How has COVID-19 and movement restrictions affected your current job role? Mr. Lobayo said something that was very interesting about remote working. These are some of the new things we have seen that has been heightened by the pandemic. So how has the restrictions affected your job role? Let us know. It will be interesting because we would want the panelists to share from their wealth of knowledge on how we can address this and how we can proceed going forward. Okay, thank you. I believe everyone has voted now. I'll go straight to Dr. Bandaras with additional questions. Dr. Bandaras, as the head of strategic policy and inclusive growth at the United Nations Development Program, what are some of the most critical challenges faced in delivering livelihood support and food security focused programs during the COVID pandemic? Over to you, Dr. Bandaras.
Thank you very much. There are several challenges that Nigeria has been facing even before the pandemic came. In terms of food security, I'm looking at both from a poverty angle as well as hunger. Some references made earlier. Before the pandemic, just before, in fact, it came, the latest data indicated 40 million or 40% of the population is below the poverty line. And similar number is having difficulties in getting food to their tables. So what it means is, before the pandemic, Nigeria has huge challenges in this area, food security related issues. And if you look at the some of the issues that pertain to this is, growth has not been inclusive in one way, because since the recession in 2016, it has been struggling to register a positive real per capita growth. What it means is, throughout that period, the income in real term has been declining in most of the people. So that has been a challenge. If you look at some of the underlying reasons, you will see that in the agricultural sector, productivity is very low. That means enough food is not produced. In fact, in a way, the government new initiative to produce food within the country itself is a good initiative, but we have a long way to go. If you look at some of the numbers that we see, why the productivity is low, the fertilizer usage in Nigeria is very low, only 6 kilograms per hectare compared to a global average of 140 kilograms per hectare. And also the management of land, irrigation, all this has been a problem. Like say, for example, out of the 34 million hectares of land, only 30 million is cultivated. That means about 4 million is to be cultivated, that's available. And the management of the systems, all these having had the impact on that one. Now, the problem with the pandemic is that pandemic is affecting the systems in most respects. Say, for example, the most recent analysis indicate that the delivery of fertilizer, seeds, and other inputs to the farmers has been affected because of the lockdown, because of the restrictions on the movement. Sometimes even after the relaxation of these movements, the movement of trucks from one place to another state, say for example, has been problematic. So that has been a problem. Some storage facilities are also causing problems. So in that sense, the COVID pandemic is impacting the sector more than it has been. I'm sure you have seen some of the numbers coming out of the research. The World Bank indicates 5 million people will be adding to the poor people. IFRI says it is about 30 million. Government calculation indicate about 20 million. In fact, it can be even more depending on how the system evolves. Because if the economy is not opened up, the more and more people who lose their jobs, and the jobless could become even a permanent one. That means the poverty and food security can be a huge challenge. Some of the calculation made for Northeast, say for example, where the economic challenges are severe even before the crisis came, about 3.3 million people can be food insecure because of the pandemic itself. So if you extrapolate it to the whole country, it can be huge. So what it means is that we need to go beyond, say, providing immediate humanitarian support. Of course, the concentration right now, even within the UNDP, the UN community, as well as the donor community, is to support that immediate needs, whether it is health related or food insecurity related ones, through, say, for example, the basket fund that we are managing. So that is good to have it as an immediate step. I think we need to look at the medium to long term as well, because it has been a sustaining problem throughout. As I said, in terms of sustainable development, Nigeria was not likely to achieve any of the SDGs, but with the pandemic, in fact, the situation is creating more problems, more challenging. So what it means is probably we need to think a little differently now, giving more space to the private sector, more space to the technological adaptation. As my colleague mentioned, it is becoming a new normal, at least for the next 2-3 years. So we need to adjust to the new systems, how to reach people through using the technology. Say, for example, as I mentioned before, delivering cash transfers has become a problem. We have fortunately adapted to the system using technology. Even for monitoring, we are using Kobo Collect and other the platforms that we have already. So these are some of the things that we need to look at, not only in the immediate term, but also in the medium to long term. We are having discussions with the government, especially the Vice President Office, in supporting the design of the new development plan in place of the medium-term plan that will expire towards the end of this year. So this is where we are. So I think we need to take this whole epidemic as an opportunity that is open to Nigeria. It has enormous amount of resources, the talent. It is a highly educated society. technology adaptation is also high, but the system itself is not catering to those opportunities. So that is something I think we need to look at in the immediate term. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Bandaras. Thank you for speaking to how we can adapt innovation, to ensure that the work in UNDP continues to bring forth good effort. Thank you very much. So on to Dr. Giwamu. The question I have for you, in your role as the co-chair of the Education in Emergencies Working Group Committee, what are the most critical challenges faced in delivering learning or providing access to education during COVID in Nigeria? Could we have better prepared for this?
Yes, we could have better prepared for this. And by that, I want to say that all states are supposed to have emergency sensitive state sector and operational plans, which prepare, they're supposed to be plans for resilience so that on the onset of emergencies, they don't just have to start looking around where would they raise funds, because each of the plans is supported by a budget. We have what you call emergency preparedness and response. And this is taking into consideration the measures that need to be put in place in advance. We had Ebola in 2014, and we escaped Ebola, but I think we kind of went to sleep. Now, for me, I'm looking at COVID as an opportunity. It's a way to build back better. And UNICEF has this program that has just been launched. It's called the Reimagine campaign. And it's looking at how to, one, respond, how to recover for children, and how to build back better. This is an opportunity for us to say, what did we not do right? And let us do it better in case of a future experience. Like I said, I feel that there's some things we should have done better, like this remote learning, because our challenge for us is how to get quality education to children in the safety of their homes. And that was why when this happened, we had to look at, okay, what can we do? We tried there were different innovations that came forward, but paramount was, how do we ensure that the children are safe in their homes, they are learning. And we're learning, when we say learning, it's not just that they're receiving school homework. No, how can we measure? How can we monitor that learning is occurring? And then how can we utilize evidence that has been generated from this encounter to improve future learning outcomes in preparing for future learning solutions that would live out this experience. So these have been the challenges we faced. Also, we're also supposed to have what we call emergency contingency plans. These are plans at our state levels, at the federal levels, that says what can happen, what do we do if it happens, who are the responsible key stakeholders, is there a cost to this, when does this have to be done? So this is something that's supposed to be a live document. Like we say, we have human-made and we have natural disasters. How effectively do we factor in the kind of different scenarios that may come in and prepare adequately, so that when it comes, we're not taking unawares. We're not saying, oh, how do we do WAEC at this time? And when you're thinking of doing WAEC, you have to also realize that a lot of children that are more or less might have been ready for WAEC are the children in the urban settings. How about the children in the rural settings? How about education playing its role to bridge and address inequities? It would have been really, for me, a bit disastrous if we had children having to do WAEC and the children in the rural areas having to write the same WAEC with those in the urban areas. So these are the challenges.
Thank you, Dr. Giwamu, for speaking to that. Really, really interesting point you raised. You talked about how children can learn in the safety of their homes and something that comes to my mind is, and that's why we're here, leveraging technology. And I would ask you this follow-up question from what you said. And I also think that Mr. Olobayo might be able to provide some perspective, given that he's in the technology industry. So how can, as an education expert, how can children in undeserved communities, partake in the shift to digital education brought by the effects of the pandemic? And then I would also ask Mr. Olobayo, because I think he can also provide some additional insight. So over to you, Dr. Giwam.
I look at it, our results ahead of time. So our results, we want, children that have, opportunities to access digital technology in every part, because like I said, the SDG goal is talking of all children. I think it is time for us to, I guess, through strategic advocacy, wake up to our responsibilities. We are duty bearers. The children are the right holders. And you and I, Karika, we had good education. And that's why we're here today. The children who we are supposed to look after their interests are able to access the same quality. We know that the digital divide, we know that for 21st century, that's the way to go. How can the private sector, first of all, the government sector, the public sector, which is the government, having in mind, having in front of them, this is their responsibility for the Nigerian child, all Nigerian children. How do we take extra effort? How do we plan to reach those children that are in areas that are underserved, like you said? The private sector, we have corporate social responsibility. This is the time. The time is now. I talked about UNICEF's Reimagine program, which was launched July 9th. And one of the key icons of that program is imagine a world for children after post-COVID-19. This is the time for us to correct those things, to take that responsibility. So for me, that's the only way, because it's going to be, there's a lot of finances involved, but there has to be a commitment and passion and desire to actually make an impact for these children so that they can take their place with their counterparts, so that they will not be, looking as if, oh, are we not the same Nigerian children? Why are some, and then education not playing its role, and we also not playing our role to bridge that gap. So those are my thoughts.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing. Mr. Olobayo.
I think before we go ahead, thank you very much, Dr. Judith. And I think that's really, really apt. I think before we go ahead, I would just like to add just a few additional things. I think to a very large extent, when we think about the challenges around education from another angle, you realize education is not the problem. Education is not the enemy. Access is actually the enemy. There needs to actually be ways to really democratize access to learning. Also, the truth is, our realities today also show us, and we see, all around us that, in a lot of cases, you have, locations and areas that are, evenly distributed and have a lot of access, and you have some really underserved and communities with, almost zero access. So I think in scenarios like that, what we really need to do is figure out how to really get access and how to get access really distributed. And I think I really like what Dr. Judith mentioned around even attempting to use radio programs to ensure learning continuity. How do we ensure that we can have inexpensive approaches? Mobility is something we are very big on. Mobility is something we believe can actually really drive a lot of not just access to learning, but actually access to development, access to growth. The real drawback to it is the cost. But like you rightly said, Dr. Judith, at some point, we really need to bite the bullet and we need to move forward. And that's really one of the real paths to growth and inclusion for society. Thank you.
Fantastic. Interesting points raised by Dr. Giwamu and Mr. Olobayo. We need to forge ahead. And, education is extremely important for sustainability as a nation and as a continent. Thank you for speaking to that. I would go straight to Mr. Uba. And Mr. Uba, given your experience as a social protection specialist at the World Bank, My question to you would be, in terms of tackling vulnerability, what is your comment on the number of unregistered displaced people in Nigeria?
Thank you. Thank you for that question. So, in terms of vulnerability, I think I would expand that particular subject to go beyond just displaced people, because it cuts across the poor, vulnerable, aged, people living with disabilities, and people in the informal sector with irregular income. So basically, there's an expansion of vulnerability, or the subject matter of vulnerability that has to come in. Now, in respect of the unregistered, as you call them, I think there's a particular discussion around when you say unregistered, you are pointing to a specific database that is tagged and trustworthy. I think what the pandemic has showed us is that a lot of work has already been done. So I was looking at the chat now, and I saw a chat from Dr. Bandara pointing to the fact that social registries already exist that are being expanded and are growing to cover more and more poor and vulnerable households in the country. I think as at the last time I checked the data, the social registry currently has about 15 million individuals in there, covering over 3 million households, poor and vulnerable households in the country. For the registration of displaced people specifically, one thing I'd like to say is that there's been quite a lot of work done by the federal government to actually put them within some sort of formal trackable system to ensure that within where they are being displaced to, because some of them are within camps, some of them are within host communities, that they are being provided with some sort of social support, cash transfers, and also psychosocial support, and provided access to services. And there's actually programs in place, especially in the Northeast, where Dr. Bandara, focuses on, to ensure that there's some sort of a way for them to be resettled back to their homes. So in as much as I would toe the line of Dr. Judith saying, we are not there yet, there's been quite a lot of work, a lot of foundational work being done, and it will probably take time for the real impact of these things to be shown and to be seen by all. So I'll leave it there and go back to you for more questions.
Thank you, Mr. Uba, for speaking to that. Indeed, based on what you said and what Dr. Judith has said, a lot of groundwork has been done, and I believe that what we need to do is how to take it next level. And to take it to its next level, do you think that technology would be imperative in achieving that next level? And how do you also think technology can assist the government in putting measures in place to address lapses in identifying, tracking, and serving migrants and displaced people?
I think that's a very, very good question. So you touched on two very interesting and thematic areas. So one, you touched on identity systems, and then you also touched on the protection systems within the country. Mm-hmm. What can government do? That's quite interesting. I think government can do a lot, but I think we should look at it specifically. Okay, so the SSA earlier mentioned in her keynote speaker about the World Bank's Identification for Development program, which was approved in February of this year, and is supporting the government to expand on and improve on our identity systems within the country. So she mentioned that, and looking at identification broadly, there are foundational systems that need to be in place. So there's the foundational identity systems, and then there are functional identity systems that need to be in place. First and foremost, the first question we need to ask is, we need to understand, what the real lapses are, what the real gaps are, what has government done, and for starters, government put in place a strategic roadmap on digital identification, which has been approved by the Federal Executive Council. NIMC has been, NIMC is the National Identity Management Commission. They've been, instituted for quite a while, and there has been a huge growth since the approval of the strategic roadmap for digital identification. So first of all, we need to understand what the real gaps are. Why are these lapses? Why is there a seeming slowdown of gap? And the one thing I like to say, because when you see a challenge and there's a question of, okay, give more money and then it solves the problem. So yes, money is important, but not just money. And then you have to look at the actual design of the identity system. So the approach for enrollment and the system itself, is it inclusive? And then how do people now leverage that to access services? And quite a lot of innovation will revolve around the how do you enroll people first into the system, and how do you create products that leverage these identity services for people, especially those in hard-to-reach areas. Now, for those people, especially in hard-to-reach areas, then there's quite a lot of stakeholder engagement that needs to go into it, because on the one hand, we live in very urban areas and in cities that have access to technology, good education, mobile network. But there are a lot of hard-to-reach areas, and I know Dr. Judith knows these areas very well, especially my UNDP colleague as well. Places where there's no cell service, this is just voice, we're not even talking about data, that we need to come up with not just digital technology, but also frugal type innovations. Following, I like that your colleague from Softcom was speaking to human-centered design. And if you actually bring the humans into the design, you realize that quite a lot of things that we are designing at our level are not sufficient for them. So yes, digital technology is important. There's a foundation that digital technology has to play. But as you go closer and closer to the rural areas, you begin to find out that you need to begin to leverage more frugal technology for better inclusion. So back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Oba, for speaking to that, and highlighting the fact that yes, technology is fantastic. However, we still have some of our limitations as a country. So it would be interesting to see how this evolves in years to come. Thank you for speaking to that. Now I'll go on to Mr. Lobayo. Mr. Lobayo, from the comments of the other panelists who have touched on areas such as education, learning, identity, livelihood support, it is obvious that continuous and deliberate innovation, and this also includes technology, is key in achieving organizational objectives. However, research has shown that non-tech professionals are hesitant in exploring innovations and new approaches, especially when it comes to technology. How would you, as a technology provider, assist them in balancing operational realities with innovative explorations? Over to you, Mr. Lobayo.
Thanks, Karika. That's a very deep question. Yeah. I think let me begin by attempting to really unpack why non-tech partners and maybe some development enablers might be very averse to innovation, right? When you think about the concept of the concept of social good and social impact, right, and development enabling in itself, is extremely high stake. Is really, really high stake. We're dealing with real lives of people we're dealing with real humans. I'll connect with them on that, on that level that you can't afford to be experimenting. So in some instances, you might want to stick to what has worked, as opposed to experimenting with new things. Then also in some cases, you also have maybe, development enablers who are functioning in new and different territories. Then again, if you're in a new territory, you rather stick to what you know has, is guaranteed to work as opposed to, experimenting. Then maybe in some cases, there's also the case of bad experiences historically. So possibly historically, an attempt at innovation has, has been explored, and that just ended in, that just didn't deliver the result. And there's also now the need for standardization. When you think about maybe like the UNICEF is in 100, is in multiple countries, over 100 countries across the world. There's need to balance, localization and just standardizing across multiple territories. So by the time you think about all of the all of the realities that some of the development enablers have to deal with, you kind of really connect to why there's a specific approach to getting things done. But that said, how do we balance these realities? I think the first is there really needs to be a tighter knit collaboration, both within the innovation, the innovation industry, or let me say the technology industry, and the development enablers. So as an example, the needs and realities are ever evolving, and you don't want to get to the point of evolution before you are trying to adjust. This time last year, we never knew COVID was going to show up. But COVID showed up and we are all attempting to adjust. So I think there needs to be a lot more tighter integration between the operational realities of development enablers and technology or technology partners in itself. Then I think the second is what I touched on briefly. I'll stick to just 2 points. Is the concept of human-centered innovation. It's extremely important as well for technology and innovation companies to really connect with the actual needs of development enablers. I think in our journey as Softcom, just in the journey of delivering inclusive growth society, we must have operated in at least 700 local government areas in Nigeria, at least 700. And let me just give you 2 examples. The first is, sometime in 2018, I actually personally visited the Bayelsa camp in Borno State in the Northeast. It wasn't until I visited Bayelsa camp that I actually realized some of the difficulties that the development enablers within that space had to go through, whether it's challenges around registering the IDPs to even delivering education in crisis environments and things like that. I'll give you a second example, which is, so we worked with a development enabler about 2 years ago to deliver micro lending to a specific segment of society. So micro traders and vulnerable women. So we deliver micro lending to them. And we had always been innovating for them, right? So you think you want to deliver money to them. So you can send them money on their phones. I think it's as simple as just dialing a USSD code. But it wasn't until we went to the field. We actually went to the field with the engineering team. Then the engineering team realized that even USSD is actually for the extremely learned, because it's easier for me to make you use a mobile app than make you use USSD. Because a mobile app, if I want you to tap this button, I can make it big and red. I can use user experience to make you tap it. But for USSD, you must be able to read it, and you must be able to quickly use it in 20 seconds. Otherwise, everything's crashed. And I think that experience in itself now led us to what we call human banking. Which meant, an individual can now actually place a call, and the banking, they can carry out banking activities, and which, saw us actually, enabling almost 400,000 market women actually, cash out through that process. So I think the 2 key points I will really stick to is there needs to be a tighter collaboration between the development enablers and technology partners, and also the technology companies themselves really need to insert themselves into the operational realities of the development enablers. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for speaking to that, and for actually breaking it down, because like you said, one of the things I say is that for every behavior there's a root to it, and I like the fact that you went back to the root to also talk about possibilities why there's some hesitation with fully embracing technology like that. So thank you very much. Before we go back to more questions, because I have additional questions for Dr. Banderas and also ask the questions from the audience, I would also want to call on the audience again to have their opinion on through a poll. So can I have the poll up? Again, one of the things we've seen is that sustainable development is a collaborative effort, so we want your opinion. So the question says, what do you think humanitarian response should provide primarily? So do let us know what you think. Is it economic livelihood? Is it food security? Is it capacity building? Is it others? So let us know. And we will share the results in the question and answer segment so that we would ask the panelists. Okay, thank you for that. The next question on the poll for the audience, can I have the next question, please? So the next question speaks to, would you support e-learning and provision of hardware for disadvantaged communities in Nigeria? And this speaks to what Dr. Giwamu and Mr. Labayo had spoken about, inclusion in education and ensuring that everyone has access to education. So over to you, the audience. Would you support e-learning and provision of hardware for disadvantaged communities in Nigeria? Thank you. So before we go on to the next poll, I believe we still have Our Excellency, the Special Advisor to the President. I have a question for her. And my question would be, Ma, do you envision that realistically we can achieve the SDGs by 2030 as development organizations are working separate? As development organizations, how do you think we can achieve this? And how do you think we can work in more synergy to achieve the goals, if we can? Over to you, Your Excellency.
Yes. Thank you so much for that. Part of what will make us achieve is what we are doing at the moment, working with all the stakeholders, the actors and non-state actors, in building synergy together. And one thing we need to understand is that FDG cannot be achieved at the federal level. So the composition of federal government, sub-national government, the state and the local government, and understanding the fact that the sub-national government, the state and the local government, the key players in this is where the problem lies. Working with the private sector, civil society organizations, NGOs, women, youth organizations, academia, and all of us coming together, donor agencies and development partners coming together to see how we can improve the life. We're making a lot of impact and development before COVID-19 came. And I listened to the president of Nigeria that said that in the next 10 years, 100 people will be moved out of poverty. The framework and action plan towards there, I told her assuming that and we put in place before the COVID came in, and with COVID now has brought more people to poverty. But with the support of everyone at the government level, we're trying our best, and we will continue to mobilize all the state actors working together with the non-state actors to ensure. I'm not quite sure that the world, not only Nigeria, will achieve SDG 2030. I am not sure. And of course, we are working on agenda 2060 at the moment. So whatever we are unable to achieve now will be embedded in the new development plan. And of course, Nigeria is working also on agenda 2025. Okay, so 2025 that will take us to 2030. So there is a development plan in place now to achieve that. And when you look at what we are doing, it's only we're still working at the incubation level and see how, especially for the young people that are out of school, the Humanitarian and all the rest of them, we're working, and very soon you'll see the framework of the government and action plan on how to achieve that. And quickly, we wanted to take advantage of this COVID-19 that has given us opportunity to take the children from the street back to their various states. And the state government has taken ownership of that. The Northern Governors Forum has come together. They have come together to take ownership and by taking it upon themselves that they must work together to ensure that these young people go back to school. And those of them that are not of school age, that are older people, they will learn skills to take their for future development, national development, as well developing a school, alternative school program for elementary, for them to stay in school and providing more feeding arrangement for them. Because one feeding cannot guarantee their stay. So we are increasing this feeding arrangement for them and working together. By the time we roll out this plan, working with the private sector is mobilizing funds to support us heavily, and the developer partner is also working, Unicef is working, Untitled is working, all of us coming together. And whatever plan or outcome of this meeting will also help us in our planning. I'm sure that we're on course. We are very, very on course because what I have seen since when I occupy this position is different from what we normally do before, because we have a commitment as a government and we are working so much and so hard to be able to deliver on our policies. So I think we try as much as possible. Nigeria cannot afford to fail. If Nigeria fails, the whole of Africa fails, and we are too big to fail. So we will try as much as possible, working with all the MJs at the national level and work with the sub-national bodies also to ensure that all hands on deck. We are getting more support from the sub-national body, and I'm sure we will be fine, because ordinarily COVID that we are taking us more than this, but because of our proactiveness and what we have started doing, the implementation of anything they are taking us at this level, we will have the worst, not that out of action before now, although we don't expect to come, but it's still our ability. So we are good to go. We are good to go. We are on course, and we are not distracted by any. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for speaking to that. Indeed, it's work in progress, and again, I like you said, synergy between all the development partners, the government, the private sector, will be necessary to ensure that we achieve our development goals, our SDG goals. So thank you for speaking to that. And then something that you said that was key, indeed, Nigeria cannot fail. We would not fail, we would leverage our resources. We have fantastic subject matter experts here, and would continue to leverage our expertise to ensure that, we make Nigeria, we ensure that Nigeria attains sustainable development. So thank you, Your Excellency. I understand that you have very high stakeholder engagement. So thank you for your time, and we'll get right straight into the poll. So back to the audience, you would have a poll appear on your screen. So the first, we already talked about e-learning. Dr. Giwamu and Mr. Lobayo spoke to how e-learnings and digital technology would be good to have to ensure inclusion in education. So next, you're going to have another poll on your screen. Let us know your thoughts on how digital payments, would you trust a digital payment system to disburse stipends and cash-based support? So Mr. Obaha talked about cash transfers, Dr. Bandaras talked about how the UNDP is working to ensure livelihood support. So over to you, the audience. Would you trust a digital system, payment system to disburse stipends and cash-based support? And I believe that should have been answered, and we'll go to the last question for the audience. Please, can I have the last question up? Which of the following Nigerian formal identification systems are you enrolled into? So Mr. Oba had spoken about how to promote social inclusion, how to ensure that we can track people. So which of them are you currently enrolled into? So let us know. We will share the results shortly, and I would also add it to the question and answers for the panelists. Okay, so thank you to the audience for being so gracious. Dr. Bandaras, I have a question for you, actually for Dr. Bandaras, for everyone. There's something Mr. Lobayo mentioned when he answered his very first question, and he talked about remote working, how they're leveraging technology to work remotely. But on the flip side, what that could also present is also potential loss of jobs for people, right? So how do you think that we can embrace, and I'm going to ask everybody, including Mr. Lobayo, how do you think we can embrace remote working, the new normal, while ensuring that human capital development and social impact is still on the rise? Over to you, Dr. Bandaras.
Thank you very much. That's a very interesting question. Because we can't leave out technology at all if we want to move forward. But at the same time, we need to recognize the digital divide we have. In the sense, even within a country, there may be different accessibility levels. Some people may not have internet at all. Some people may not have digital devices at all. So what it means is, so long we have this digital divide, and if we try to promote that without trying to have a level playing field, some people might lose. As you said, some people can lose even jobs if they are not up to the standards of adapting new technology. So what it means is, while the technological adaptation has a huge benefit in terms of development, in terms of social welfare, in terms of improved well-being of people, it can be challenging in a society where there is a huge digital divide. If, say, for example, new generation knows better how to use technology, have access, they might benefit, but at the same time, the older population may not. Some even, if, say, for example, an institution fully digitalized and the older generation in the institution cannot afford to learn or use them, they might lose. They might be at a disadvantage even in career progress. So it is a disadvantage for them. What it means is we need to have a kind of holistic approach to education, use of technology, availability of access to technology. In fact, some of the concerns we have, especially when we talk about remote working, is that in Nigeria, the internet bandwidth is very weak. It is weaker than even in Zimbabwe, where I came from 6 months ago. Sometimes, even very recently, it took 30 minutes for me to access a webinar like this one because of the weak connections we have. Imagine a situation, a person working in the remote areas. It may not necessarily be that good at all. So these are some of the things we need to look at. But at the same time, while this technology is key to achieve, we need to look at from other angles as well. How to make use of it, whether we need to have that digital gap to differentiate between people who have it or people do not have. So those are some of the things I think we need to look at, but at the same time, looking from the experiences we have from other countries. Some countries definitely have used the technology to reach out to the farmers in terms of providing all these needy assets. And in terms of health, I know in countries like Rwanda, they use robots and drones to deliver health equipment, medicine, and all to the very remote areas and vulnerable populations. Even for us, one of the things, in fact, that came to my mind, one good thing of remote working is that you might have realized that we can do many things at lower cost, right? Sometimes we have already delivered, but not delivered in terms of utilizing the money we have already made available. So what it means is, going forward, I think we need to adjust to the systems and also make sure that the other people who are not or who are at a disadvantage are capacitated to utilize these new instruments and platforms. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Bandaras. Thank you very much for that. So that I want to see the results, so that the poll results, so that I can just ask everything together. Please, can I have the results for the first poll? Okay, so what sector do you currently work in? We had, what question do you currently work in? So we have 13%, you know, I mean, the results are there, and it shows that we have a lot of people in the others, and then we have information technology. That's interesting. Okay, can I have the second, the answers to the second question, second poll? So has COVID-19 and movement restrictions affected your current job role? A lot of people have said yes. This is very interesting. And I want to speak to Dr. Giwamo, over to you. I have a question for you. So considering that we have people in different sectors here, and one thing that is common to most people here is that COVID-19 has affected their current job role. As someone in education, how do you think that we can begin to turn our curriculums, you know, for jobs of the future? Because if the movement, COVID-19 and the movement restrictions has affected current job roles, right? How do you think that this is going to affect the jobs of the future? And how do you think we can begin to work on it from the educational sector? Dr. Judith, over to you.
Well, yeah, the COVID-19 has actually affected a lot of jobs. And looking at how we can move forward, for me, I look at it as coming up with innovative example. There was this critical meeting we're supposed to have, and it was just when the COVID-19, the onset of COVID-19, and we're wondering, because it was critical to have that meeting to generate an outcome which will inform decision making. And, you know, we just had to, how could we do it? We needed a large number of, you know, a consultative forum with key stakeholders from across different sectors. And then we had to come up with, okay, so let's do virtual meetings. And the meeting was so successful. We had our breakout sessions, and it was quite exciting. Coming to the fact that because of the availability of, because of what has happened with the COVID-19, I just feel that there are still some roles that you play that are still very critical. And it is for us in our role to look for the innovative opportunities that will make us very, very valuable. There are some things that, yes, they can move virtually, but there are some things that also need human capital. Humans have to be there to drive it. So for me, I look at it as something that, in spite of what is happening, your job, depending on how you're able to innovate, you can still make it so relevant that the issue of losing jobs does not come in, because they find out that you are still very valuable to achieving desired outcomes.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for speaking to that. Can we have the results for the third and fourth polls, please? Okay, while the result is coming up, I'm going to take some of the questions that the audience have asked. So the first question would be for, just a minute, I'm trying to bring it up. A lot of questions for Dr. Judith. So, Mr. Olobayo, this question is for you. Mr. Olobayo, what is the future of schools, particularly in the face of remote learning, seeing that the aggregators of learning content are now available to offer certificates as validations of learning? I'm also aware that Google has announced that Google certificates will now be equated with 4-year degrees. How do you think that will do for the future of technology-oriented jobs? So someone from the audience asked this, and he directed it specifically to you. So over to you, Mr. Lobayo.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Karika. I think the future of education and indeed the future of schools in itself, I mean, there's a significant amount of disruption that we're going to be seeing down the horizon. And I think, I mean, organizations like Google and co have actually really started leading this effort. So Google is saying now, I mean, even partnering with the US government and saying you don't necessarily need a university degree before you can begin to work in their organization. Primarily because, I mean, technology in itself affords you the opportunity to, it's like a building block, right? Technology takes care of, I mean, some of those foundational things and just gives you access to the specific thing that you need to learn, right? When you think about the evolution of learning in itself, right? There's this PhD thesis about, I forget his name now, but he was speaking about the 36 principles of gaming and what it can teach us about education. And part of what, I mean, he was saying in his thesis is things like just-in-time learning are now very, very paramount, right? So as an example, you might not even have access to a particular learning, or you might not have access to a particular subject area. And at the point where you need to access it, you just go for it, right? You Google it and you access it in itself. And I think things like that will be a whole lot more prevalent. And it's a future we really need to prepare for. I trained as an electrical engineer, as an example, right? But right now, I mean, when you think about the concept of diode, anodes, and all of those things, right? I mean, the average person does not even need to use it on the day-to-day anymore. I mean, you start from, all of the building blocks that have been built. And I think we'll be seeing a whole lot more of that. I also think education as well. I mean, and when you think about maybe our realities, maybe even from the point of view of like Nigeria. In Nigeria today, you can find 10,000 great teachers, but you can't find 100,000 good teachers. You can't find 500,000 good teachers. And we have over 40 million children of school age, 23 million in schools, another 30 million out of schools. The truth is there needs to be a significant amount of innovating around how to solve for this. And I think to a very large extent, some of these things that we're beginning to see globally are what we now begin to see, I mean, even in our own environment, day-to-day principles being applied to learning. Also, I mean, just reimagining the concept of learning in itself, because that's really what will enable us and achieve progress and achieve it very quickly and at scale. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lobayo. Thank you so much for speaking to that. Can we have the poll results for 5, 6? Thank you. Because there's a question that I think would be so would you trust a digital payment system to disperse spend and cash-based support? 97% said yes, and 3% said no. Interesting. I would direct this question to Mr. Lobayo, but can I see the results for the sixth poll? The one on identity? Okay, fantastic. So which of the following formal identification systems are you enrolled into? some team to said, a lot of people said BVN because money is important. So I have a question for you, Mr. Uba. Do you think that having a unified system in Nigeria is crucial for sustainable development on the long run?
Thank you, Karika, for that question. So I don't think there's a simple answer to that question, or rather, it's not a yes or no answer. So the one thing that is important definitely is a functional identity system. The implementation and the design of that identity system there are various paradigms that you can use. You can either have a decentralized identification system, or you can have a centralized identification system. And we have examples all over the world that show that both paradigms actually function properly and work quite well. So I'll speak to the specific Nigerian context in general. I was speaking earlier and I mentioned that there are two forms of identification. There's the foundational identification and there's functional identification. What Nigeria is trying to build is first and foremost a foundational system that will allow for access to services through functional identification means. Now, the foundational identification would be the NIN, which is the National Identity Number. And then functional identification would be identity systems like the BVN, your driver's license, your international passport, etc. In terms of the actual design paradigm, so there are specific good concepts that can be followed. And the World Bank's ID4D initiative has put together principles for good identity system design that cover inclusion, which means universal coverage without discrimination, removal of barriers to access that identity system, and then the actual design itself, which has to be robust, interoperable, and using open standards so that everyone can connect. And then this, built on top of the foundation of good governance around, good institutional and capacity and accountability, privacy and legal and trust frameworks. So every, identity system has to, usually and should follow, those design principles, whether it be centralized or decentralized, either way. So yes, Nigeria is following the centralized approach because what we have now is that we have quite a number of biometric databases, all over the country. You go to road safety, you have to register your biometrics. You go to the bank, you have to register your biometrics. Immigration, same thing. And the telcos. So having a foundational identity system that can ensure unified enrollment would be very, very good and essential for sustainable development moving forward. But on top of that, you have to now include, apart from the good design principles, on top of the foundational system, you now have to include a good functional identity mechanism. So institutions so schools, for instance, have to leverage this identity, to go to authorize payment systems like the BVN. So if you want to make transactions, how do you verify and validate the person making those transactions and going forward? Then in the middle of both of them would be a good enrollment system. So in Nigeria right now, a couple of days ago, the president instituted a steering committee for an ecosystem steering committee, whose primary job would be to coordinate among the various stakeholders in the identity ecosystem to ensure that on the one hand, they can provide enrollment services both across public and private sector, and on the other hand, to provide authentication services. Yes, Nigeria is taking that design paradigm, and it's good, and it will definitely foster sustainable development because identities are the foundation of it. But it's not necessarily how do I put it, a gold standard, because people have used the decentralized approach and it has worked quite well. The UK, for instance, is one of such cases. So I'll leave it there. Back to you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for speaking to that. So I'll go straight to the other poll question that talked on payment. Let me see. I remember from the top of my head, and 97% picked that they would trust they would trust digital payment, and 3% said they would not. Fantastic. So this question is for Dr. Bandaras. In your operations with UNDP, because I want to assume that a lot of people here that have voted, because you have access to webinar and internet, you're not a 100% representative of the sample size called Nigeria. So over to you, Dr. Bandaras. What has been your experience in, because you talked a lot about cash transfers, what has been your experience in deploying cash stipends to people in Nigeria in your programs? Has it been all embracing? What are some of the things you have faced, and what are some of the challenges that you have faced in carrying out your operations?
Thank you. In terms of cash transfers per se, I don't see any problem we have encountered before the pandemic or even after, because we have through the social registry, all the beneficiaries have the mobile wallets. That is a good thing, so we can straight away transfer the money. But if you look at how to utilize it from the beneficiary's point of view, and if, say, for example, is the money is utilized to make the payment through, say, point of sale, like in other countries, then you may have some problems if the internet system is not working. Because I can remember it happened in Zimbabwe. Say, for example, when you go to a supermarket and use the card, it doesn't work because the system is not. But in this case, since it is a pure cash transfer, probably it is not having a serious problem so far, because we are using the existing mechanisms. But at the same time, we need to make sure that the cash is gone to the real beneficiary. So we use some technology to monitor them. One of them I mentioned is the Kobo collector system that we are using as an institution. And at the same time, in Northeast, say, for example, we have been using Red Rose, the platform. One thing there also is the effectiveness depends on how good the mobile or internet connections is, because even, say, for example, sometimes the telephone calls are also not working properly in certain circumstances. So all these can affect, but in general, I don't see a serious problem for cash transfers for humanitarian assistance. Over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Bandaras. Mr. Uba, would you like to add to that? Because I know you said you have some additional information to add to that as well. Over to you.
Yes, so I mean, just to add to what my colleague has said, in terms of cash transfers, especially to poor and vulnerable households, the major challenges are not necessarily around the transfers themselves. It's actually the access to the legal tender that this population is actually used to, and most of them are still very used to spending cash. And it was interesting when Mr. Olobayo was speaking about USSD, and it actually did occur to me that to actually use USSD, it's a bit more difficult than tapping a button or being prompted by user experience. And USSD is even rarely available to quite a number of this population. So on the one hand, you have the cash transfers that are working well. Yes, money is being paid to digital wallets through mobile money providers. But when you look at the financial access that these people have, a typical example would be you go to Niger State where bank branches are not, so widespread. Agency banking is still fairly new and recent in Nigeria, and even most of the agents that have been brought on board still reside within the urban and peri-urban areas, and have really not, pitched their tent in the rural and hard to reach areas. And it's really not their fault, because there's really no business case for them, to be there. So, I mean, there's still quite a lot of work in the financial sector. And I know CBN, the Central Bank of Nigeria, is taking this quite seriously. They've constituted a financial inclusion secretariat that a couple of players are also part of. They have the SANEF program that is looking at expanding the agency network. But then I'll now look at people like Softcom, who are actually dealing in payments or coming up with some payment innovations to actually look at payment products. And I like that Mr. Lobayo already said that they already things like that are already being thought about. But looking at payments that are specifically focused to the poor and vulnerable population in Nigeria, that will also ensure for merchant uptake, because at the end of the day, if people have funds in their wallet and they cannot spend it or they cannot cash out, the funds are not very useful to them. So just to add those few thoughts, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Oba, for speaking to that. Very, very interesting. You already spoke to Mr. Lobayo, and I think that because he should speak to it, because I know that Subcom has payment and identity as one of their focus areas. So, Mr. Lobayo, over to you. How have you expanded your reach to the unbankable, and how do you foresee, even designing products and solutions to ensure that everyone is included everyone is included financially? Over to you, Mr. Lobayo.
Thank you for that question, Karika. I think, how do we ensure that everybody is financially included? I think it's already woven into the first question, which is what kind of efforts do we have ongoing in attempting to ensure that we reach the unbanked or the unbankable, as the case is. I think, permit me to just speak to maybe a few things that we're getting done. Like I mentioned earlier, our efforts in itself are across 4 key areas: identity, to enable you identify anyone, identify the correct person; payments, to enable you bank anybody as long as I have a phone number; learning, to drive capacity development at scale and deepen it irrespective of the type of access that people have; and data, just insights for decision making, both collecting the data and analyzing it. And I think in the area of identity and payments specifically, so we're working actively with the NIMC. So right now, as an example, for any national identity number that you have, we could easily verify it. So we have all of the authorizations and integrations that enables us to verify any identity. And due to the World Bank efforts and the current ecosystem being built out, there is the effort also to ensure that we can also drive the efforts around identifying people, so enrollment as it is. But I would like to speak to maybe enrollment specifically before I leave identity. The truth is, if you look at the enrollment landscape today, if you go to, just the enrollment point, you want to capture your national ID, you want to get a national ID, you interact with at a minimum 5 or 6 systems. So you interact with the CPU, interact with the application inside the CPU, interact with the fingerprint reader, interact with a printer. So there is, a fixed enrollment unit has all of these things, and all of these different disparate points in itself, they are not entirely mobile, and is extremely difficult to deploy to, in some cases, hard to reach area. And part of the efforts that we have is we currently built a 442 fingerprint scanner that entirely works offline, that ensures also that you can capture, people's data and do all of that without even necessarily needing to connect to a computer. So just on your mobile phone, just with a mobile phone, you can actually operate the scanner. And the beauty of it is, part of what we're also innovating is to ensure that the scanner does not even need a power source. So as an example, we can operate just on a battery. What that means is in the future stage, you can now go to really remote locations armed with just your phone, an entirely autonomous fingerprint scanner and your white background. In fact, part of what we've done is you don't even need a white background. Once you capture the person's details, the algorithm just gives the person the background on top. I think that's part of what we're doing in identity. I think also I would like to speak to the BVN space as well. So currently, BVN has actually peaked. What I mean by that is there's only about 40 to 45 million BVNs in Nigeria today. So what that means is only about 45 million of us have bank accounts. And statistics have shown that people are no longer walking in to the bank to get BVN anymore, right? So what that means is the financial services industry needs to figure out another way to get people enrolled and financially included. So currently working with NIBS, we've built a mobile enrollment SDK. What that SDK does is it enables you, just like I mentioned with identity, enables you operate and enroll people and assign BVNs to them just on your mobile phone and working with a fingerprint scanner. Now, these two, approaches, I think they're extremely, disruptive, and they enable us really deepen, the financial inclusion efforts in itself. In the areas, especially in the really, really hard to reach and remote areas. Regarding payments, so there's this product that we have. It's called Eyowo. I will encourage everybody to go to eyowo.com. What we've really done with Eyowo is we enable you to transact with anyone just on their phone number. So right now, I mentioned we have only about 45 million BVNs. Banks have existed for 125 years. But over these 125 years, there's only about 45 million customers in a country of about 200 million people. So what we did with Eyowo is, before I speak about Eyowo, the mobile telephony industry have existed for only about 20 years. And I know as of December 2018, there were at least 160 million phone lines in Nigeria. Even if some of us have a phone, have two phones, there's at least 120 million unique records, right? So what that means is if you really want to drive financial inclusion, your BVN itself can't be the common denominator. You need to figure out another denominator. And that's what that was what drove us to actually build Eyowo. So Eyowo enables you bank on any phone number. As long as you have a phone number, you can bank with people, right? So as an example, I could just send 1,000 naira to Dr. Judith now. She's going to receive a text message from Eyowo saying you just received 1,000 naira. And what we've managed to do, with Eyowo is we've connected it to every single network. We've connected to every single mobile network, every single banking network. We've also connected it to over 360,000 agents across Nigeria. So what that means is I can send money to your phone number, and you can send that money to any other person's phone number immediately. You can also go to a bank you can send that money to any bank account you like immediately. And you can also send it to over 360 SANF agents and go and collect it. Over 360,000 SANF agents and go and collect it. And you can also receive from people. So I will encourage everybody to kind of go into their banking mobile app. If you go to your GT mobile app, you find Eyowo there as well. Primarily also because Eyowo can also receive, and your bank account is your phone number minus 0. What we've done with that is we've just first increased the pool from 45 million people to 120 million people. And secondly, what we've also done is we've attempted to really democratize and to liberalize the concept of cash. So as an example, if you want to access the cash, you're no longer confined to the bank. There are other approaches that you can take. For us, the value proposition, from an Eyowo point of view, or even from a subcom point of view, is actually inclusion and growth. So how do we ensure that we can drive inclusion, and how do we ensure that we can, give people everything that they need to grow? I think, just so I don't overrun, because I'm sure I could speak and speak and speak. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. I answered the question. Yeah. Thank you. Very interesting. Very interesting. I like the idea of sending money on phone numbers. In my head, I was asking myself, who is going to send me money now? I even wanted us to practicalize it, but we're running out of time. So thank you for speaking to that. And I'm happy with, all that has been shared. Thank you to, we're going to be rounding up now because our time is fast spent. Thank you, Mr. Uba. Thank you, Dr. Bandara. Thank you, Dr. Giwamu. Thank you, Mr. Olobayo, for sharing from your wealth of knowledge and experience. I believe that, everyone in the audience has left some additional knowledge, and your horizon has also been expanded. I know that through the insights that have been shared here, we would come back fortified, and we would go through this pandemic season stronger and better. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you again. I would hand over now to Mr. Onagoruwa to give his closing remarks. Over to you, Mr. Onagoruwa. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Karika. And thank you all very much for staying with us and for your valuable information and contributions. I'm sure you'd all agree that the last couple of hours have been insightful, engaging, and thought-provoking. There's no doubt that we've all learned something new, something meaningful, something that drives positive impacts in the lives of many, and that's why we're here. We're here because of people, not statistics, not numbers, because of the faces that we see every day. This event has been extremely enlightening for us all. This meeting is about what happens next and what technology solutions will help in times of crisis. We fully understand the synergy that is needed to reach our mark where we want to be by the year 2030. The private sector has a significant contribution to make to both humanitarian response and sustainable development. I'm sure you all agree that a society, an economy, or a business can simply not rise beyond the capacity of its people. Hence, our work in education is focused on providing access to quality resources and training to aid capacity development. We work with systems and organizations to connect them with data, information, and insight. They need to make informed decisions. Currently, only about 40 million Nigerians are digitally identified, as we discussed earlier, and have access to financial services and are able to transact seamlessly. We've built a bank on the mobile phone that enables everyone with a feature or a smartphone access financial services and pay anyone, as we just outlined, whether they're banked, unbanked, online or offline. This product has enabled over 1 million previously unbanked Nigerians access financial services and receive payments directly on their phones for the first time. We propose strengthening the linkages between the humanitarian development and the private sector through changing the terms of approach, outlook, design, and execution frameworks to drive sustainable impact. Nigeria is a key player on the global stage, and we're here to ensure that she takes her rightful place amongst the polity of nations. And just to conclude, I would really like to thank our distinguished keynote speaker, Her Excellency Princess Adejoke Orelokwe Adefulire, the Senior Special Advisor to the President on SDGs and the former Deputy Governor of Lagos State. And also our panelists for their succinct and valuable insights and for sharing their knowledge and experiences. Dr. Judith of Unicef, Dr. Bandara of UNDP, Mr. Uba of the World Bank, and Mr. Olobayo of SOFCOM. I'd also like to thank the event moderator, Karika Yoreme. Thank you all. Also, thank you to every single one of you, our guests, for attending, and we look forward to acting on all the points that have been discussed today. But also, very, very big thank you to everyone and our partners who have worked in organizing this great event. Thank you all. We hope to host you again in the near future. Have a lovely weekend.